You know, Russell Westbrook doesn't have a temperament to put up with that. Come on, y'all. That isn't who he is. Stephen A. Smith didn't hold back after Russell Westbrook was left sitting in free agency, clowning the former MVP in a way fans are calling flat-out brutal. But here's the thing. What he said is not just jokes. It hints at a deeper fallout between Westbrook and the league itself. And the truth about why Russ is still unsigned might be far messier than anyone is admitting. Let's get into it. The clowning heard around the NBA. Russell Westbrook, once the walking triple-double, the relentless Energizer Bunny of the NBA, is now sitting in basketball purgatory. The man who used to dominate highlight reels with sheer force of will is, in 2025, unemployed in basketball terms. And Stephen A. Smith, never shy to put a spotlight on NBA dysfunction, has gone all in on clowning him. Not with sympathy, not with sugar-coated excuses, but with the kind of raw public criticism that makes headlines and divides fan bases overnight. This is not just a story about one player's decline. It is about what happens when an NBA icon refuses to adapt, when the league he helped build decides to move on without him, and when one of the most powerful voices in sports media takes the gloves off. Because the way Stephen A. dragged Westbrook tells us as much about the NBA machine as it does about Brody himself. Let's not waste time. Here is how Stephen A. opened his assault. Inexcusable behavior. That is what I saw. And I do not know why this is not being talked about enough. To be quite honest with you, inexcusable. That is not a word tossed lightly on national television. For a player of Westbrook's stature, a former MVP, to be framed in those terms is a public shaming. And Stephen A. did not stop there. He flat out said he believed Westbrook deserved to be suspended after a reckless playoff performance, labeling it appalling and inexcusable. But here is the shocking part. For years, analysts and fans whispered that Russ was a liability, that his style did not fit the modern NBA. Now, Stephen A. was amplifying on the loudest platform in basketball media. And he went a step further, making the chilling prediction that if Westbrook could not take a lesser role, he could actually be without a job next year. Think about that. From MVP to unemployed, from a nightly Sports Center top 10 to being clowned, as a free agent no one wants to touch. So, how did we get here? How did the same Russell Westbrook, the man who once averaged a triple-double across 3 straight seasons, who forced his way into the Hall of Fame conversation through sheer willpower, end up on the receiving end of Stephen A.'s ridicule? To answer that, we have to rewind, because Russ was not supposed to be here. He was the kid who nearly went to Stanford for academics. Basketball was Plan B. This was not a man destined only for the hardwood, but once he got there, he took it personally, and for a while, that fire carried him. My parents always told me, you need to get a good education, and I was actually thinking about going to Stanford just for academics out of high school. Teammates, legends, even rivals praised him as one of the hardest working players they had ever seen. James Harden himself admitted that Westbrook's MVP season was perhaps the greatest single-season performance we have ever seen. Other legends compared his fire to Michael Jordan's and his relentlessness to Kobe Bryant's. But here is the tragic twist. That same unrelenting style that made him feared is exactly what the modern NBA has turned against. Teams stop guarding him. Opponents beg him to shoot. Colin Cowherd noted that Westbrook had become the least guarded guard in the league, with defenses literally stepping back and daring him to fire away. It is one thing for a role player to be ignored, but for a former MVP, that is humiliation. That is basketball's version of exile. And Stephen A. knew it. That is why he did not just criticize Russ's game. He ridiculed his stubbornness, his inability to change. Russell Westbrook cannot change. He is not going to be a good defender. He has not been for the last 14 years. And that is not changing. This was not about missing shots. It was about the NBA's most infamous flaw, the refusal to adapt. When Russ was younger, his athleticism made up for it. But now, every flaw is magnified. Every gamble, every turnover, every ill-timed jump pass becomes fuel for critics. And the critics did not stop at the court. Often, Russ's very name was dragged through the mud. The Westbrook chants grew so loud his family stopped attending games. Honestly, I was at a teacher-parent conference for my son, and the teacher told me, she's like, Noah, he is so proud of his last name. He writes it everywhere. He writes it on everything. He tells everybody, walks around and says, I am a Westbrook. Westbrook, that is his last name. And I kind of sat there in shock, and it hit me like, damn, I can no longer allow people, for example, Westbrook. To me, it is now shaming. It is shaming my name. It is my legacy for my kids. That is not just heckling. That is psychological warfare. And when Westbrook finally broke his silence on how deeply it cut him, the world saw the human cost of his decline. So, imagine sitting at home, already carrying that weight, and then turning on ESPN to hear Stephen A. saying, you might not even have a job next season. That is not analysis. That is a public execution. And it worked, because here we are, still talking about it. But here is the bombshell you are not ready for. Stephen A. did not just go after Russ. He put LeBron James on blast. He accused LeBron of contributing to the cynicism around Westbrook, even pointing back to Houston playoff days when LeBron's Lakers mocked Russ as a liability. LeBron is guilty of that. Remember when Russell Westbrook was in Houston and they were in the playoffs against the Lakers, and LeBron James and the Lakers were talking about, he's with us, when he had the ball? Think about that betrayal. One of the greatest players in NBA history, the man who vouched for Russ joining the Lakers, mocked him behind the scenes. And then, when things went bad, let rumors of replacing him with Kyrie Irving swirl all offseason. So now, the question is not just whether Russ deserves a roster spot. It is whether the entire NBA machine, from stars, analysts, to fans, build him up only to tear him down. And the most shocking part? We are just getting started. Because what Stephen A. hinted at, Russ being left jobless, is the darkest irony in recent NBA history. A man who gave everything to the game, clowned on national TV, ridiculed by fans, and now standing on the edge of irrelevance. The real question is not whether Westbrook failed. It is whether the NBA failed him. The thing about Westbrook is that he was never supposed to be the punchline. When he came into the league, he was not hyped like LeBron. He was not billed as the next Jordan. He was not handed the keys to a franchise on draft night. He was raw, undersized for a two-guard and too wild for a point guard. But what he did have was unshakable belief. That belief became his brand. The same single-mindedness that made UCLA coaches scratch their heads turned into a Hall of Fame resume. For seasons averaging a triple-double. That is not just numbers. That is rewriting basketball history. Legends like Oscar Robertson had to watch the impossible become reality. Westbrook was not just playing basketball. He was making defiance an art form. But there is a cruel irony here. The very thing that lifted Russ to greatness, his refusal to bend, his refusal to change or anyone, is now what analysts like Stephen A. use to destroy him. Magic Johnson said it himself. You have to own your stuff. You cannot just blame the fans, the media, or teammates. And for all of Westbrook's fire, accountability has never been his strongest weapon. Think about how the game has evolved. The NBA of 2025 is built on spacing, efficiency, and threes. Meanwhile, Stephen A. hammered this exact point. Russ has never been a good shooter. This is only about your game. You have not been a good shooter. You have not been a good shooter. That is not opinion. That is a cold, hard truth. And in a league obsessed with advanced stats, Russ's inefficiency became unforgivable. Where once he could mask it by flying past offenders, now his missed jumpers feel like turnovers. Yet, here's where the story cuts deeper. Because it is not just about percentages. It is about perception. When defenses literally back away from you, the humiliation echoes louder than any box score. Imagine being a future Hall of Famer and watching defenders treat you like you are invisible. That is not just a tactical adjustment. It is basketball's version of exile, and Russ felt it. That is why his frustration boiled over into emotional press conferences, like when he addressed the Westbrook chant. He admitted that the nickname was no longer just about him. It was hurting his family, even his kids. I can no longer allow people, for example, Westbrook. To me, it is now shaming. It is shaming my name. It is my legacy for my kids. That is devastating. We are not just talking about missed shots anymore. We are talking about a man's identity being mocked publicly until his children cannot even enjoy their father's career without hearing insults in the stands. And yet, when Stephen A. had the chance to soften, to show sympathy, he doubled down. He called Westbrook's antics appalling. He accused him of failing his team when it mattered most. And he flat out mocked the idea that Russ could reinvent himself as a role player. The problem with Russ on the defensive end is his mental mistakes. He does not pay attention off the ball. He gambles way too much. He goes for steals constantly. For Stephen A., this was not about hating Russ. This was about telling the basketball world a brutal truth. The game had passed him by, and if Russ did not adapt, he would not just fade. He would be erased. But here is the twist. Not everyone agreed. Legends who played with or against Westbrook still defended him. Former stars like Tracy McGrady and Chauncey Billups called him a once-in-a-generation competitor. Teammates from OKC to Washington vouched for him as one of the best locker room guys they had ever had. Some even compared his fire to Michael Jordan's competitive nature. So why the disconnect? Why do players still ride for Russ while analysts roast him alive? The answer is perspective. Teammates see the work, the energy, the daily grind. Analysts see the missed shots, the turnovers, the losses. And fans, they see the memes. They hear Westbrook. They watch YouTube compilations of bad plays looped endlessly. And perception becomes reality. Which brings us back to Stephen A. Because whether you agree with him or not, his platform shapes the narrative. When he says Russ might be out of job, he is not just analyzing. He is writing the obituary of Westbrook's career in real time. And in the NBA, perception often becomes prophecy. But here is where things get truly explosive. Because Stephen A. did not just clown Russ. He called out LeBron James, accusing him of being part of the problem. That is betrayal at the highest level. LeBron, the same superstar who vouched for Westbrook joining the Lakers, who publicly defended him on Twitter, was being accused of undermining him all along. And when Kyrie Irving trade rumors swirled the following summer, it only reinforced the perception that Russ was disposable even to the king. So, let's be clear. This is not just a story about Westbrook being a free agent. It is about the politics of the NBA, about how stars protect their legacy at the expense of others, about how the media amplifies every flaw until a player becomes unrecognizable. And it is about what happens when a man who built his entire identity on defiance has no one left to defy. Because here is the gut punch. Stephen A.'s prediction has come true. Russ is still a free agent. Teams have moved on. The game has shifted. And for all the passion, all the history, all the blood and sweat he left on the floor, the league has essentially said, we are done. So when Stephen A. clowns him, it is not just entertainment. It is the sound of a door closing. It is the NBA telling one of its fiercest warriors, thank you for your service, but we do not need you anymore. And that is why this matters. Because Russell Westbrook is not just any player. He is a cautionary tale for every star who thinks their athleticism will last forever, every icon who thinks their willpower alone can fight time. Stephen A. Smith did not just clown Russ. He exposed a brutal truth about the NBA. Loyalty is conditional. Greatness is temporary. And once the game decides you are done, it does not matter who you were. You can be clowned, ridiculed, and left behind. Respect versus ridicule. The hypocrisy of the NBA. The humiliation of being unsigned is not just about contracts. It is about symbolism. When an MVP-caliber player sits idle in free agency, the message is loud. You are no longer wanted. And that is what cuts the deepest for Russell Westbrook. Because for over a decade, teams did not just want him. They needed him. He was the spark, the motor, the storm that kept franchises alive. Oklahoma City, Washington, Houston, even the Lakers. Every team gambled on him because they believed he could change the trajectory of their season. And for stretches, he did. But now, with every passing day of free agency, Westbrook's career looks less like a chapter in progress and more like a book closing in slow motion. Stephen A. knew it, and he weaponized it. On live television, he did not just critique Russ's play. He called out the behavior. Inexcusable behavior. That is what I saw. And I do not know why this is not being talked about enough. To be quite honest with you, inexcusable. Think about that word. It is not about missed shots or defensive lapses. It is about accountability. It is about saying Westbrook has crossed a line that effort alone cannot defend. And when Stephen A. says that on NBA Countdown, it is not just his opinion. It is a narrative that ripples across every debate show, every podcast, every YouTube highlight. But here is where the hypocrisy starts. Because while Stephen A. paints Russ as appalling on the court, some of the game's most respected voices have painted the exact opposite picture off the court. Teammates describe Russ as one of the best locker room leaders they have ever had. Young players have shared stories of Westbrook empowering them, demanding they step into their greatness, even giving motivational speeches in practice that sounded more like sermons and pep talks. But what sells on ESPN?